I'm brewing a lager today, so the bulk of the grain I'm using is lager malt, so I've got 3 kilos of lager malt there. I'm also using 500 grams of wheat malt, 400 grams of crushed torrefied wheat, and 100 grams of malted oats. Now, I'm using each of these for a different reason. The reason they have in common is that they're going past their best before date. In fact, some of them are way past, but I still believe it will make a very good beer out of them. So I'm just using them up. But each will bring a different attribute to the lager. Obviously, the lager malt, that's the bulk of our ingredient. Will give us most of our malt in the wort. The torrefied wheat will give a lovely wheaty flavour, a bit like sugar puffs. That'll be a really nice element to the lager. Wheat malt, again, will add another dimension to the flavour. Probably make the beer a little cloudy, but I'm actually using a blanche yeast anyway, which is meant for cloudy beers. The yeast is meant to be in the beer to add flavour, so we don't care about any cloudiness. So as well as the wheatiness, the malted oats, which I'm including just a little bit. Oats provide oil to the beer, which will give a very velvety, smooth finish to it. So we've got our grains together. What I'll be doing next is putting them into my mash tun, but you don't need any elaborate mash tun. You can buy a proprietary one, you can build one yourself like I have. If you're brewing on a smaller scale or you've got a very large saucepan, you can just use a saucepan, because all you really need to do for your mash is heat your water up to about 70 degrees C, which is what we call our strike heat. You stir in the grains to make a nice thick porridgey consistency, and then you leave it. You leave it it's going to be around 62 degrees, 63 degrees, because obviously the lower temperature of the grains was going to cool down that hotter water. And then you maintain that temperature for about an hour and a half. You can insulate the container that you've put your mash into, or indeed if you're using a large saucepan or some form of boiler, you can keep returning the temperature up by putting the gas on underneath, switching the heat on, making sure you stir as you do so you don't scorch any of the grains on the bottom. So then after that, if you're not using a mash tun where you just open up your tap and drain off the wort, what you then need to do is just pour it into a grain bag or a large sieve, and you're sieving off the hot sugary liquid from there, and that's your wort. So you really don't have to have any fancy equipment. Right, well, I'm going to get these in my mash tun and get the mash going. Normally I add these two to my mash when I'm brewing an ale style of beer rather than the lager. And also I've got generally some darker grains in there which will acidify the mash, because the mash does need to be slightly acidic. In a lager, generally speaking, you wouldn't find these treatment salts. If you were adding anything to adjust the acidity, you'd be using a lactic acid like this. I'm going to use this today because I'm not using any strongly coloured grains which would otherwise acidify the mash. Now, usually I would use this in conjunction with some pH strips just to make sure I can see that my pH is about 5. Unfortunately, I've mislaid my pH strips and I don't have a pH meter, so I'm going to try and wing it from memory with just getting used to the water that we've got here. I think maybe 2 ml of this should do the trick to acidify our mash. So we're going to stir the malts in gradually, because we don't want any dry pockets of grain forming. So that nice thick porridgey consistency should be just right for all the enzymes in the malt to get going. breaking down the starch into sugars, which we can then ferment. Lovely. Let's check the temperature. So, our mash is around about the right temperature. It's not well, yes, it is an exact science for some people, but I'm happy to be a bit slapdash. 64 degrees, that's about right for me. So we're going to put the lid on and leave that for an hour and a half. Most of our heat loss will be through the lid, so we're going to make sure that's nicely insulated. Right, so whilst that mash is going on for an hour and a half, it gives me a chance to do the weekly shop. Whilst I'm there, I'm going to get some oranges, because I'm going to include some orange in this beer. I referred to the beer earlier on as a lager. You could call it a lager, you could call it a wheat beer, because I'm putting some wheat malt in, although, as you saw before, out of the grain bill, wheat makes up less than 50%. Whatever it is, it's a beer, and I think it's going to be a nice one.
By the time I'd got back from the weekly shop and everything was put away, the mash had had its 90 minutes. So it was time to collect the wort, so I opened up the tap at the bottom of the mash tun and let the wort run into the boiler. It's at this point that I sprinkle the top of the mash with hot water. Sparging like this whilst we're collecting the wort is known as sparging on the fly. There are other ways to do it, but this is the way that I do it. Once I've collected all my wort, I then bring it to the boil. Once boiling, I add my hops. So in goes 30 grams of Saaz hops.
So 15 minutes before the end of the boil, we'll be adding our 50 grams of Hallertauer Hersbrucker hops. We shall also be adding some orange peel. It's a sweet orange. We're using the peel off. Obviously you could take the peel off with a zester here, because we do just want the outer peel and not the bitter inner peel. So, let's see how much we've got there. There we go, 25 grams of the peel. At the same time, we're going to add 20 grams of crushed coriander seed.
And into the boiler these late additions go. At the end of the boil, we cool the wort down as quickly as possible. This takes about half an hour by running cold water through these hoses into these copper coils, the heat from the wort being exchanged with the cold water inside the copper coils. And once it's come down to the temperature that we want, I run off the wort into a fermenter. And it's at this point that I collect a sample to take a hydrometer reading.
It's quite difficult to see when you get down to eye level with the gradations on the hydrometer, as you really should do, but because of the cloudiness of this beer we can't do that effectively, so we need to look from above. And it looks like our specific gravity is pretty much 1.050, which is spot on. So the next stage I've not shown in any fine detail. And that was now the wort has cooled down, ready for the yeast. I've pitched in a blanche yeast and left that to ferment for a couple of weeks. Then after that 2 weeks, I've siphoned it off into a keg. Here I've got the Cornelius keg which I've used. I primed it with sugar this time, even though sometimes I only force carbonate, but I wanted to propagate the yeast because that is going to give some element of flavour to the finished beer. So it's matured enough in there, and now it's time to tap it and have a taste. Whoa! Bollocks! Cock.
As you can guess, that wasn't supposed to happen. So whilst I start a bit of a clean-up operation, cleaning the beer off the floor and the walls, we'll just watch a time-lapse film of the head of the beer settling down. So we can just watch that as we reflect upon making sure your tap doesn't leak before you connect it to a pressurised keg.
It's got a lovely white creamy head to it. Really lovely hoppy nose to it. I intentionally put a fairly small proportion of hops in at the beginning of the boil, so there wouldn't be quite so many of the bittering hops. That was the SARS, the 30 grams which I put in at the beginning, and went for a far heavier load of hops right at the end, the late hops for the last 15 minutes to really concentrate on the aroma, and that was the Hallertauer Herzbrucker hops I put in there. And obviously at the same time I put in the orange peel and the coriander. I think it's time for a taste. That is really nice. Now, there's obviously those aromatics in there from the hops and from the coriander and the orange peel, and also the yeast itself has given a slight sort of clovey flavour to it. Very subtle, mind you, not overpowering. But one of the key differences from when I've used those spices and ingredients before, using extract or from a kit, the key difference now with doing it in an all-grain beer is the complexity of the other flavours in there. And also the scope that you've got to vary the flavour. I really tried to design a beer that was really to my taste. Essentially based on one of my favourite beers, which is actually on this glass here. And I spoke to a very nice chap in the Saint-Germain brewery, where the page 24 or page 24 beer is brewed. And although his English was excellent and his vocab only let him down on one area, at least he was nice enough to actually show me the raw ingredients so I could see what went in there. And the key thing is, which I've not used before, with the malted oats, which have given it that lovely smooth velvety flavour and mouthfeel to it, and also the torrefied wheat that went in there has given a lovely sort of wheaty, grainy flavour to this beer. I'm very happy with that indeed, and I can thoroughly recommend it to anybody, as can I thoroughly recommend, if you can buy it, the page 24 beer. It's from the north of France, the Pas de Calais area, where they also in that area brew ch'ti bière, which is possibly a bit more famous, particularly after a film was released, Bienvenue les Ch'tis. You still may be unaware of that, but certainly if you go to the north of France, or hopefully if they start exporting elsewhere, find that beer. If you can't, brew it yourself. I'm not saying this is identical to it, but it's pretty damn close in the aspects which I think are really excellent to their beer. So, cheers.